this afternoon, we are very excited to have a distinguished panel of speakers with us. Joining me today are George Thomson. George has his camera off currently, but he'll join us, who is currently the Deputy Trade Commissioner for Southeast Asia at the Department for International Trade UK. Mr. Andrew Diamond, who is our Deputy Chairman of our board, as well as the founder of AssetData.io, who will chair and moderate our panel session later. Mr. Mohammad Azmi Zulkifli, the CEO of InvestKL. David Kelly, the Executive Director of BridgeCham Singapore, and our business leaders who are joining at the panel discussion today, Natasha, the Managing Director of Asia for BAE Systems, and Paul Gibbons of Sports Direct MSD Malaysia. Welcome everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN, with a wide single market comprising 600 million people and the world's third largest labor force, presents opportunities in diverse sectors for small and large investors. As the bloc becomes more integrated, ASEAN is projected to become the fourth largest economy by 2030, with the best growth potential for investors in the medium and long term. As one of the top countries in ASEAN, Malaysia has always been a preferred destination for British exporters and investors, and many global organizations, including British companies that have established their regional presence and operations in Malaysia. British brands, as all of you know, have been in, like the financial services sector, have been in Malaysia for more than 100 years. The UK and Malaysia's robust bilateral trade and investment relations, developed through historical contacts, continues to create opportunities in areas such as digital transformation and e-commerce. Malaysia just launched their digital economy blueprint last Friday. We also see opportunities in other areas in education, especially continue to see opportunities in education where UK is strong, especially in edutech, green technology, healthcare, as well as the role of SMEs in global value chain, despite all these current conditions. However, as we are still in the face of an unprecedented medical, social, and economic challenges, there are still many questions that need explanations for. So how has the pandemic affected trade in ASEAN and Malaysia's position? Will the vaccine, Malaysia received our vaccine just over the weekend. How has the vaccine, will the vaccine be the game changer, or are there other key factors in our recovery? While we do see opportunities in the region as well in Malaysia, what are the challenges? Are the fundamentals strong enough to overcome these challenges? What are Malaysia's initiatives, initiatives to revitalize the economy? So we hope that our speakers today will be able to provide some insights to these questions. So as a chamber itself, we want to continue to promote ASEAN and Malaysia as a preferred destination for trade and investment, especially for UK businesses, and to support UK companies as your business partner to expand not just in Malaysia, but also in the ASEAN region. In the region, we work in collaboration with our fellow British chambers in Southeast Asia through Britain in Southeast Asia Network. Today's webinar is one such example. So on that note, I would like to invite my colleague David, who is the Executive Director of British Chamber in Singapore, and also who co-chairs the Britain in Southeast Asia Network, to say a few words. David, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Jen. Welcome, good afternoon to all of you that are in a similar time zone to us, and thank you for having me today. It really is a delight to be here and to support this event on doing business in ASEAN, with today's focus, of course, being on Malaysia. As mentioned, my name is David Kelly. I'm the Executive Director of the British Chamber of Commerce in Singapore. So just quickly, thank you, Jen, to you and your team at the British Malaysian Chamber of Commerce, to InvestKL as well, and to our stellar speaker lineup today. I'm very much looking forward to the session. So why am I here? Well, other than the fantastic speaker lineup and the topic, I was really delighted when Jen reached out to seek ways of collaborating more closely on themes that would suit both of our members. As a broad network of supporting chambers of commerce and some similar members that sit in both of our organisations, it's a pleasure to support our neighbours as the chamber network seeks to build stronger ties to support key themes such as trade, the road to net zero, and other similar sector interests across both countries, such as education, technology and healthcare, to name a few that Jen has also just mentioned. As Jen has also mentioned, we are part of a wider collective network called BICEA, Britain in Southeast Asia. And really the purpose of that is to ensure that there are ecosystems, not just in Malaysia and Singapore, but broader around the region to support businesses and business growth across ASEAN. So with excitement of the ASEAN region gathering yet more pace, chambers like the British Malaysian Chamber of Commerce and indeed the chamber here in Singapore are doing a lot more to collaborate more closely. Indeed, only last year, the UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, prior to his visit to the region, said that global Britain is open for business and there are huge trading opportunities with both Singapore and Malaysia. He went on to highlight that both countries are the linchpin partners of Southeast Asia, and we share very similar interests around security, stability, and opportunities for trade. So events like this are perfect in terms of providing that regional focus, drilling down to a specific country, supported by a broader chamber network across ASEAN. And I think this can only be a good thing. So well done, Jen, and thank you for your involvement today. So with that, I'd like to hand back. I hope you all have a really great session. Look forward to hearing what the speakers have got to say. And thank you once again for having me. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, David. Thank you for a nice introduction and talking about the collaboration across the region, which is very important for all our members and the UK companies. So before I introduce our next speaker, a bit of administrative rules. We hope that you will take this opportunity to all the audience present to raise as many questions as possible for our speakers and panelists. You can key in your questions via the Q&A function that you see on your screens. And as whenever you want to ask a question, please key in the Q&A. But however, please do note that questions will be addressed during the panel session. I'm sure our chair for the panel later will address all your questions as much as possible, as much as time permits. So, so to our next speaker, moving on to our next speaker, Mr. Azmi Zulkifli, the CEO of InvestKL. Just quickly about Azmi. Azmi has led teams in InvestKL successfully. I think it's very important to mention this, to bring in more than 100 MNCs to set up regional hubs and headquarters with Greater Kuala Lumpur. Today, in his current role as the CEO, he leads his team to continually to identify, facilitate, and develop solutions for MNCs to locate to high-value regional hubs, not just in Greater KL, but also in Malaysia. And we at the Chamber, we work very closely with Azmi and his team, his vibrant team at InvestKL to support UK businesses who are already here and also who are thinking about Malaysia as a location or ASEAN as a region. So with much experience in InvestKL, I think he's the right person, and we are delighted to have him with us to provide a short brief on InvestKL's good work and the latest updates. Azmi, over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon, good morning, happy Monday to everyone. InvestKL is a federal agency of the Malaysian government under the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. It's a fairly new agency that was created in 2011 with a very special focus towards bringing large multinational, large companies, fast-growing companies to look at how they can use Greater Kuala Lumpur as a regional hub for business, innovation, as well as talent activities. And this is key, as Greater Kuala Lumpur is an area that encapsulates a number of activities that will promote this kind of functions. The main activities that have landed in Greater KL from a regional perspective are towards activities in the services sector. And we are focused on the high value, high tech, and high impact services. To date, as mentioned by Jennifer, we have successfully attracted 103 multinationals, out of which 45% are from Europe and from UK specifically, around 10 companies. And these companies have stretched across a number of industries, be it in oil and gas, in the financial sector, in the pharmaceutical sector as well, and in many other areas, including education. And this is where we are encouraged because of the long history and strong collaboration that UK and Malaysia has got over the years. I must thank the team from the British Malaysia Chamber of Commerce, led by Jennifer, for supporting us in this initiative. Thank you as well to David from the British Chamber of Singapore, and to the team in InvestKL who have helped to organize this. I will look forward to share a lot more of information and in the next activities that we go through. Thank you.
Thank you, Azmi. Let's quickly move on to our next speaker. We are delighted today to have the Deputy Trade Commissioner for Asia Pacific for DIT. As many of you would be aware, the BMCC is proud to be a delivery partner for Department for International Trade in Malaysia. We support UK businesses coming into Malaysia and in partnership with DIT, and we work great as we work with the InvestKL very closely with the teams in DIT in Malaysia. So George, we are very happy that you're able to spend some time to share your views about the region and about Malaysia. So before I pass the session to George for his remarks, I must share that a bit about George. He is I think it's his first time speaking for the British Chamber in Malaysia. So prior to this, he was the Chief Operating Officer for DIT across the APAC region, and before that, Senior Private Secretary to the Secretary of State for International Trade. So George is here to share his insights. I'm very much looking forward to on the UK and ASEAN trade relationships, the opportunities for UK businesses as well as UK's relationship. So George, may I invite you now to give your remarks? Over to you, George.
Thank you, Jennifer, for the very warm introduction, and hello everyone who's on the line. It's great to have so many people here, both with interest in Malaysia and supporting UK-Malaysia trade. So it's with a little bit of sadness that I reflect that while I was in KL 5 or 6 times in 2019 for a mixture of work and social engagements, it's now almost exactly a year since I was in Malaysia last because of the world we're living in, but I hope that can change soon. And as I'd shared Jennifer's sentiments about wishing everyone the best who's caught up in the MCO at the moment. But thank you for the opportunity to speak today. So what I want to do is set the scene a bit around the UK's trade ambitions in Asia Pacific, and then narrow it to ASEAN and then to Malaysia itself. David mentioned earlier that the Foreign Secretary, UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, who was in Singapore late last year, stated on that trip that the UK is making a decisive tilt towards Asia Pacific. On the trade side of the UK government, we probably think that had already happened a year or two ago, because we've always recognised this region as such an important part of what we're trying to achieve for the UK. So at the heart of that tilt, as it were, are the promotion of free trade and partnership on global issues like climate change. The UK has now concluded 63 trade agreements since leaving the EU, covering nearly £1 trillion of our bilateral trade. Now, of course, most of those have been continuity agreements emanating from our membership of the EU, but they include deals with Singapore and Vietnam, and we've also secured the historical new free trade agreement for the UK with Japan, and are negotiating new free trade agreements with New Zealand and Australia. So that sets what we're trying to do in this wider region. At the ASEAN level, in 2021, we're trying to secure dialogue partner status with the bloc, and the UK, that comes from a good place. The UK already has really good and productive relations with the region. We've got embassies or high commissions in all 10 ASEAN members, and the Department of International Trade, who I work for and represent in ASEAN, is present in 9 of those countries. And we know that's based on the fact that ASEAN has great economic fundamentals, so it's on course to become the 4th largest economy by 2030, and UK-ASEAN trade is about £40 billion per year. Now, it's risky when you try and break down the quite immediate statistical releases when we live in such a up and down economy at the moment. But it's fair to say that from what we've seen since the pandemic began, UK ASEAN trade has actually stood up fairly well compared to quite sharp drops with other bits of the world, and that's a signal of the strength of the relationship and the future that it has, but also the sort of fairly strong supply chains across this region that they have with the UK as well. So coming from a position of strength, but we know we can do better. So, for example, if you took the UK's market share in ASEAN and lifted it to the level of market share we have with a region like the Gulf states in the Middle East, then we'd unlock tens of billions of pounds new trade for the UK and ASEAN countries. So that's where I think we should be aiming to get to. Now, going back to Asia Pacific, it seems pretty clear to me that this region now represents the epicenter of progressive trade diplomacy. We've seen RCEP agreed in the last year, and that's going to be a real boon for regional trade and connectivity. But for the UK, and we'll get into lots of acronyms today, it is the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. So that's the CPTPP, to those of us on the trade side, that the UK is seeking to accede to. Now, this is a 11-member deal, 7 of those within Asia Pacific, 4 within ASEAN. And if you add the UK to that existing membership, that deal would cover nearly 20% of global GDP. And from the UK's perspective, CPTPP offers the best opportunity to enhance our trade with the participating countries in the region. And we know that involves Malaysia and Brunei. Of course, both those countries are yet to ratify the agreement, and that's a matter for those 2 governments to decide. But CPTPP is a really high standard agreement. It addresses non-tariff barriers in services as well as tariff barriers on goods. And it does a lot more to integrate supply chains. That point I keep coming back to in the way we've seen the global economy develop in the last couple of years. That integration is really of supply chains is really the bedrock of catapulting bilateral trade flows between different markets or regions. So alongside our ambitions for CPTPP accession, in Malaysia, DIT, so that's the Department of International Trade that I work for, has also established a joint committee on bilateral trade and investment cooperation with MITI here, so the Ministry of International Trade and Industry in Malaysia, and we started that late last year. So this joint committee provides a framework for the UK and Malaysia to work together at the government level and to create the right conditions for market access with each other. So in 2021, we hope to see 6 working groups examining how we can further grow the trade, and areas of focus: education, legal services, in the food and drink sector, so wines and spirits and halal products, but also greater cooperation and conformity at the SME level as well, which I think is really, really critical for that next stage of trade relations. So on UK-Malaysia trade flows generally, I mentioned we're holding up quite well in ASEAN. That also applies for the UK-Malaysia relationship. So total trade in goods and services between us was £4.7 billion in the 4 quarters that ended at the end of Q3 2020. And that's about 5% down on a year previous, but that really doesn't feel like too bad a position to be in compared to what we've seen in terms of some of the international trade flows and how they've been hit since the pandemic began. And of UK exports to Malaysia, that 2.4 billion, or just over half of that, was that figure, and that fell by just 1% over that time. So really, really quite strong performance. UK investment Malaysia. So we heard earlier, there are 10 UK multinationals or so based in Malaysia, and we see that extensive investment footprint. Financial services, big pharma, and big energy companies too. Those energy companies now particularly focused on energy transition and low carbon. And I think we're also starting to see an emerging trend of smaller UK tech companies move to Malaysia, and that possibly also reflects the change in the UK economy that we've seen in the last few years as the UK becomes a real European leader for tech startups, and often these companies are very keen to invest into Asia at the first opportunity. When I think of some noteworthy new investments or recent investments, we know of Smith & Nephew, who have opened their medical device manufacturing plant in Penang. That's a really significant investment, and we want to see more of the same. What else have we seen in terms of UK investment into Malaysia? Well, we have the UK 5 university campuses and countless other partnerships in secondary and tertiary education. And again, I think they're really important as part of Malaysia's move up the value chain and the talent pool that we see in Malaysia, and that again links back to that point of UK tech firms coming in and seeing Malaysia as a really good place to attract high quality staff. So I'm told that MDEC, for those of you who don't know, it's the Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation, have said that we're now really close to having 100 UK companies via the multimedia super corridor. And of course, we've got examples of UK investors elsewhere on the panel today, so it's really good to see colleagues from BAES and Sports Direct as well, so examples of investment in tech, defence and retail respectively. And in particular, I just wanted to congratulate MIDA and InvestKL in battling really challenging circumstances and continuing to attract new investment to Malaysia. As we noted, over 100 multinational companies. KL in particular continues to shine as a regional hub for major investments. So we look forward to continuing to work with you and bringing in the next generation of UK investors. DIT always stands ready to help with our teams, both in KL and then elsewhere in the region. And we have specialists based around the region in sectors that the UK is really excited about. So that might be renewables, offshore wind, education tech, fintech, smart cities, digital health, etc. And we should probably touch on the political economy and business environment in Malaysia. And just, we've talked about the strength of the relationship, but what do we need to see to see that continue to build the future? And it would be unwise to sort of get ourselves embroiled in the debate about FDI figures. And I know there's been some challenge to what the UN has suggested about Malaysia's performance. But suffice to say that attracting and retaining the type of FDI that Malaysia wants, so that's high tech, high skills, high value add investment, really needs a stable political and regulatory environment in the UK. UK does everything it can to support that. Obviously, we are midway through a pandemic and we have the state of emergency running till August and the election expected around that time, which creates a degree of instability that can't really be mitigated at this time. But we want to see those big ticket projects in rail and defence and sectors like that ideally continue, and it would be a shame to see some of that demand side investment reduced in the economy at this time. And UK economies who have invested here do face a bit of ongoing uncertainty. So the 12th Malaysia plan, which will hopefully provide signals about the future investment environment for the country over the medium to long term, will be really, really helpful. But my understanding is we don't have a fixed date for that yet. And in terms of how Malaysia can and will recover, it's not for the UK to say to Malaysia how and when it manages the transition out of MCO and out of the pandemic. But we would be really worried to see any deprioritization of education, and in particular the fact that the education sector wasn't seen as an essential sector under the MCO restrictions is a real shame, because we'd like to see UK children back in schools as a national priority. The approval of the Pfizer vaccine, we should touch on that as well. I mean, that was only over the weekend, and that immunization provides real hope, however. So I think, I think it's Fitch have suggested that the Malaysian economy will grow at about 5% this year, and I think that tallies with our internal assessment as well. And it stands as a reminder that the Malaysian long-term economic growth path is really, really positive, and there's no reason to think that the growth rates that we saw in the years prior to the pandemic can't reassert themselves. And we'll continue to provide information and guidance to ensure that UK companies already in this region and thinking about coming here are fully aware of what Malaysia has to offer. And obviously the Chamber, Jennifer and David mentioned, as Southeast Asian network of chambers are always here to provide help in tandem with us. So for any companies, UK companies out there thinking about investing in ASEAN or Malaysia specifically, remember those long-term growth forecasts. You'll all have seen the incredibly impressive statistics about future spending power, about the trends in tech and digitalization. They absolutely are real and the fundamentals are there. And my open offer and advice is that if you need to talk to DIT in Malaysia or another market or one of our partner chambers, it might be MIDA or InvestKL, we can make those introductions for you. But we should, between us, have most of the answers, so please do get in touch. And if there are any attendees today that need those introductions, then I'm happy to be put in touch with them. Anyway, I've probably said more than enough, Jennifer, so I'll leave it there and we can move to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I think you have rounded up, or I'll say given us a good overview of starting from the ambitions of UK ambitions in the region, potential to see growth in the relationships, also touching about some of the opportunities that you see as the Deputy Trade Commissioner, our DIT sees. Also, not forgetting, we have to address some of the challenges that Malaysia faces. But to end it all, it's thank you for the assurance that the economic part is positive despite all the challenges that we face. So thank you for that, and it is a good brief. So without further ado, I think it's nicely a start for the panel discussion. So joining George and Azmi on the panel will be our industry leaders or business leaders who have their own organizations invested in Malaysia and has been around for many years in Malaysia. So Natasha is from BAE and Paul, as I mentioned earlier, from Sports Direct. So I shall pass the session now to our Deputy Chairman, Andrew Dryman, who is an entrepreneur himself, very into the tech industry and very passionate about SMEs. So George, it's good to hear that UK is also taking considerations of at the SME level now. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Jen. Thank you very much, George, Azmi. I'll quickly actually pass over to, let's start with Natasha to give a quick overview of what Natasha is doing in Malaysia within ASEAN and at BAE.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So Malaysia is actually our headquarters for the Asia region, but in ASEAN specifically, we have a presence in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and Thailand. We've been in Malaysia for over 50 years, and in fact is the largest international defense and security supplier to Malaysia. We have major platforms across all three of the services and a significant presence in cyber security. We have a global engineering center here in Kuala Lumpur that employs 320 people, and this has actually increased tenfold since its inception in 2013. The business actually represents 10% of our cyber business's global footprint and is the second largest outside the UK. On the defence side, our head office employs 14 staff, and we also have a joint venture with BHIC, which employs another 15 employees. Across this footprint in Malaysia, nearly 80% of our employees are Malaysian, and we also have a fairly large cyber footprint in Singapore with around 72 staff, and this business started in 2008.
Thank you very much, Natasha, and I'll pass over now to Paul at Sports Direct.
Thanks, Andrew. Quick introduction from my side, and welcome to everybody. I'm the managing partner of this JV partnership with Sports Direct, now known as Fraser's Group from the UK. We started this business in 2010. We've invested a little under 300 million ringgit in the business so far over the last 10 years. And we're a relatively small partner for InvestKL, but I think an important one, and perhaps can answer some of your questions for those of you that are looking to come to Malaysia. I'm a little biased on the basis that I've lived here for almost 28 years and my family were brought up here, though my wife is from the UK. We currently have 33 stores, 800 staff, and represent about 75 sports brands in the local market. We made Malaysia, our principal hub status about 18 months ago, with the intention of growing from Malaysia out into the ASEAN region. And we've set up so far a global services department as part of that hub status, with the anticipated expansion into Singapore in the third quarter of this year. Just to touch on Frasers Group as the parent company, our annual sales of over 4 billion sterling, represented in 20 countries with 1,500 stores and over 30,000 employees. So that's just give you a sense, a little bit of the background from our side, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Paul and Natasha. So just to introduce myself, Andrew Diamond, I'm the Deputy Chairman of BMCC. I've been on the board for, I think, 12 or 13 years now. I was actually born and grew up in Malaysia, so I will be slightly biased in my ASEAN talks. With respect to David in Singapore, Malaysia is a wonderful place to be and to do business, and in particular Kuala Lumpur. So for me, it's having this conversation and this chat is great. I really want to, where we can, open up about challenges. I think it's great that there's a lot of positivity. As mentioned, ASEAN is an incredible place to be going forward. The growth, the opportunities for the investment. But I think the value a lot of people also get is experience of people that are here, what's going on now, and that adds a lot of value to people. So where we can, we're going to see some challenges we've got, but a lot of obviously positives. That's why we're here, and it's an incredibly positive time to be here, even with the challenges that we've got. So to kick that off, there is, as George mentioned, political instability at the moment. We do have a prime minister in place. There is an emergency. Budgets have been approved, so investments going on. But obviously it does create a slight air of challenges for some people potentially. But if you also look back at for me, the last 10, 20 years of Malaysia, there's always little road bumps, but the growth, the long term is always there. And I think that's one of the things that for me is yes, there are challenges, but that long term is there. And everyone has these bumps. And I think it's important to also look through that and see where the future is going to go. So with that, my first kind of question is going to be in two folds. One is obviously everyone's been impacted by COVID. So how businesses are trying to mitigate that within Malaysia and what they can and cannot do, as well as support for InvestKL and how they're engaging and if anyone's adjusted slightly, as well as any input on how they feel the economy is and where we can touch on politically as well. So I think George, you gave a great cover for a lot of this. So if you've got any comments on that, on short comments, and then we'll pass over to the rest of the group.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm afraid I don't have a huge amount of new things to say on this. I would just go back to what I said before. The fundamentals of the Malaysian economy are strong and have been for some time. We've been used to GDP growth rates of around 5% plus. We shouldn't forget that Malaysia has a pretty stellar ranking in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business ranking, so number 12, I believe, and the track record of multinational investment is really, really good. The talent pool is really, really good. But we also know that the other side of the coin, that we still feel and see, and I'm agnostic on location here, obviously, because I represent all of ASEAN for the UK, but we still see so many companies choose Singapore because of its regulatory environment, and that's despite the high costs. And look, I do think we have to understand that ASEAN as a region is changing pretty quickly. Countries like Vietnam whereas perhaps you put them in a quite clear different bracket, and they are still in a different bracket in large part. They are becoming more and more attractive to international investors, and almost their slightly separate geography can become something of an advantage to them. So I don't want to be too rosy about the external pictures or challenges that Malaysia faces. It's competitive and will remain so, but it needs to keep that up. And sort of that reform process and commitment to openness, to my mind, will continue to be important.
Azmi, if you could comment, please.
Thanks, Andrew. The current challenges faced is clearly unprecedented to us and many other countries around the world. If I'm relating to what has happened in Kuala Lumpur and Malaysia, today we are perhaps in the third wave of the COVID situation. The forecasted GDP for 2021 is certainly encouraging, and we are focused on wanting to do that or even more from that perspective. Just to take a step back about a few months ago in the last quarter of 2020, that's where some green shoots of the recovery of the economy was seen before the third wave of COVID where we are today. And that has given people a lot of optimism as we enter January. From that perspective, what I'm trying to say is there is a specific focus about balancing lives and livelihood. And that's where we are determined to do that as a way forward. There are certain challenges that needs to be faced, and we are continuously driving that agenda to basically improve the ease of doing business. Certain areas where we need to be better, certain areas that we need to play catch up with our neighbors down south, and so on. And these are areas where we continue to want to improve upon, wanting to develop upon, on top of the current fundamentals. And these fundamentals are familiar to many as well. Being in a strategic location in ASEAN, far-reaching towards the ASEAN as well as the Asia Pacific, the availability of talent and is largely British-based education system, and then that's important as well. Strong connectivity and infrastructure, mainly related that I want to focus on with the broadband activities or broadband coverage, where it has allowed a lot of companies to seamlessly move towards the working from home for the past year or so. Being a cost competitive location, and that's important to us, and continuing to wanting to improve on ease of doing business. And ease of doing business would cap up so many topics under them, with regards to activities in setting up a company, expatriate movements, and so on. And these are areas where continuing with other ministries, agencies around Malaysia, we want to continue to improve on that, not just for Kuala Lumpur, but for Malaysia as a whole.
Thank you. I mean, I'll say that the internet has been running very well, both on mobile and landline. So it's actually been great to be able to work from home and have the good connections. And we're on Zoom, and everything's working really, really well. So if I pass over to Paul, what your experience is currently, please.
Yeah, a few things, Andrew. I just made some notes here. I think the first is it's very important to have a very open and transparent dialogue. Malaysia will not be for everyone. We understand that. I think it's very important. If people ask me, I always say it's important to come and visit for those that have not, and come and talk to people that are doing business in the country and understand the pitfalls and the challenges. And in every market has that. Of course, at the moment, the political instability creates some conscious questions, but I think George mentioned about long-term outlook, and we've been here so long, and as you mentioned earlier, the highs and the lows, and they come and go, and at the end of the day, I think the long-term outlook for Malaysia is still looking very positive. For us, the cost advantages probably the single most important thing when we look at the other markets within the region. Singapore is expensive. The other markets with difficulty around language. Malaysia has the British judicial system. English is widely spoken. It's very central within ASEAN. It's very easy to get around the region from here. The logistics infrastructure is very strong. And for us personally, it's a very good base for which to experiment in and with retail. So those are some of the things. I think that for companies that come in and engage in dialogue with the government, every company has a unique requirement and it's relatively straightforward to negotiate. So that would be my 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. And over to Natasha.
Thanks, Andrew. I guess I'll echo pretty much what everyone else has been saying. I spoke about our Global Engineering Centre in my introduction. This business doesn't actually just work for Malaysia and does engineering and cyber services for Malaysia. This is a global centre which does a lot of global work. And in fact, we continue to grow this to support more global work. So, you know, it's a great place for us to do it from. The majorities of those roles are high-tech, and Malaysia does offer a great talent pool. 75% of our high-tech roles are filled by Malaysians, 23 is from actually regional in ASEAN, and we only have a 2% expat specialist. So for me, Malaysia provides great diversity, good infrastructure, competitive real estate prices, government support through tax exemptions. You know, Paul mentioned the English language, etc. So, you know, those are all absolute great benefits for us to run such a centre out of Malaysia. For me personally, from a head office perspective, who manage Asia from here, it's obviously been very difficult during this pandemic, but, you know, that's probably not Malaysia's fault. It's the same thing everywhere. I cannot get to my offices in the rest of ASEAN, in Japan, Korea, etc. But that's a challenge that I think everyone has been facing when they are sitting in one country and managing teams and customers from across the place. I think from the political situation, you know, we've all just got to be patient, I guess, and as Paul mentions, a open and transparent conversation with our customers. We're working very closely with the three forces to come up with new and innovative ideas to help them through these tough economic times. You know, instead of buying new equipment, you know, upgrades, we're offering upgrades. We continue to support the Hawk aircraft. Obviously, defence and security is an essential service. So we've been able to do that throughout this pandemic, which has been great. But, you know, we need to just think maybe a little bit differently and be a bit more innovative and work with our customers to get through the tough economic situation.
Thank you very much. We've got some questions quickly coming in that we'll cover. I'm very aware of time as well, so we're doing well. But from Zach, a question for InvestKL, targeting MNCs, but are you also looking at smaller tech companies as well, and trying to attract more of those to come to Malaysia and particularly to KL as well? You know, she's working for a medium-sized engineering consultancy, and they're already in Malaysia. And engineering as well. This question: does the specific activities include engineering design work? So it's kind of, how are you capturing those? What's your focus on that as opposed to pure MNCs as well?
Sure, Andrew. In attracting investments, we are not just looking at a company per se. We have a realization that we must also work with the ecosystem. Large companies work in certain clusters, and they will also be familiar with the value chain players across those clusters. Where possible, we will certainly encourage them to be here in Kuala Lumpur with the right types of supports as well as benefits. In that respect as well, we see that for a company to prosper, they need this value chain support across that. and where those activities are evident, we would be encouraged to speak with them, discuss with them, and see how best we can give the support. When putting that into perspective, that would mean that we may have to work with other agencies that would cover certain parts of the activities, maybe from a nationwide perspective, perhaps that focuses only on engineering as well, to really facilitate these activities as a way forward. If there are fiscal type of packages that are available and the company qualifies with certain criteria, certainly that will also be part of the solutioning when we want to attract these investments.
Thank you very much. Another question that's come in from Ben Trenchard is about supporting, I can actually help ask this, for entrepreneurs and micro SMEs for the Chamber and DIT. Definitely from the Chamber's point of view, I think I'm an SME and I get incredible support, not just because I'm a board director. I've been a member for many, many years. So for SMEs and entrepreneurs, there is a lot of support. And I think it's very vibrant. There's a lot of agencies in Malaysia that also support and are very active. And as part of the new plans that have come out for Malaysia, everyone sees the importance of SMEs and technology as well. So I'm now going to go on to some individual questions. I know we're pushing time, so prompt answers would be wonderful. To Paul, in 2019, Sports Direct won the award for UK Investor of the Year. And at that point, as you mentioned, you said that this would then be your ASEAN HQ. I know you've mentioned a few things about that, but just any update on how that's gone since then, and any impact, particularly from COVID. We know that from a commercial point of view, except for Zoom, I think a lot of people have been impacted. And Natasha also mentioned being able to travel as the person in charge of ASEAN has been a challenge. So please let me know.
So yeah, so I think expansion plans have slowed, they've not stopped. Retail has been decimated in Malaysia. And when you think that there's almost 1.6 million people that are employed through retail and wholesale business, it puts a lot of worry and a lot of strain on the sector overall. We've actually taken the opportunity to use this period to elevate all of our stores with the mid to long-term plan of still rolling out to Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And these are the markets that we still remain in constant contact with regard to opening up with different retail fascias, starting to look at the expansion of additional brands, a shift into additional web, last mile distribution, so that we, as we plan to do, use Malaysia as the regional hub to expand within the region through our e-commerce platform. That's where we're at on that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll jump to Natasha to ask her how BAE Systems, with, as I hate the term, the new normal uncertainty surrounding, have your priorities changed during this period and for the next sort of foreseeable future?
Actually, Andrew, our priorities have not changed. We, as I mentioned, Asia is very important for us. As a business, we did several COVID impact assessments throughout last year, working with consultants and so forth. And, no one has a crystal ball. So we looked at various scenarios, whether it's, it could be a short-term thing. This was in March last year. We looked at it and said, okay, this is going to go away within a month. And so we looked forward. And we sort of just generally looks at security and where we sit. Won't say too much about that, but we are in a fairly interesting place in the world with various countries that don't necessarily get along with each other. So you can imagine there's a lot of nervous governments and nervous countries around the Asia region. So from our perspective, defense and security budgets across the region has not really changed. some of the Southeast Asia countries do have a little bit more of economic pressure. And as I mentioned earlier, there's ways and innovative ideas how we can work through that. But I think the important thing again is, as a company, we don't just look at selling our products from our industrial bases of the UK or the US or any of those countries. We actually look at transferring technology and doing local production. So we have partners here, and again, those make a difference to the countries that we offer our products to, that they can actually grow their businesses here. So you probably would have heard Malaysia and ASEAN talk frequently about Factory 4.0, and Azmi and various others have mentioned high-tech roles. Those are the sort of things that we're looking at and bringing into the region. Interestingly, I would say our Global Engineering Centre productivity has actually increased during this time of working at home. You can imagine these are very high-tech folks working behind a computer, developing various things which I cannot go into, but that's mainly due to no commute and less illness. So interestingly, that productivity has gone up for us.
Wonderful. Just to jump along to Azmi, a question that has come, I'd like to ask you, and it's been about the value chain that's been mentioned, and trying to put Malaysia higher up the value chain. Could you sort of discuss with me or share with us the initiatives that Malaysia is putting in place to help that as well, please?
Taking a step back, in 2018, Malaysia launched our blueprint on the Industry 4.0. That's about wanting to ensure that we focuses on the right type of investments that are equipped with automation, with the robotic process automation, as well as other activities in that direction. Bottom line is to look at a productivity increase, not necessarily with increase of people. So that's that focus in that sense. That also would steer Malaysia's economy or investments in the future towards this type of investments, be it in the services as well as the manufacturing sector. Within the COVID situation, overarching is where the federal government have announced 3 very large stimulus packages. It's about wanting to ensure that the companies can continue to operate, wanting to ensure that people can continue to survive, and these activities would then stimulate towards the economy being developed from that perspective. Over those activities as well, looking at the situation is also where we're wanting to ensure with the varying degrees of the COVID, how can we best facilitate or better facilitate, for example, mobility of people. At one particular point where Malaysia's COVID situation was better last year, some movements were allowed with recommendations and so on. And we wanted to play a key role from that perspective as well. And we are encouraging companies where required, when they need to travel and so on, with the required SOPs to be facilitated in this respect. So that's from that mobility of people. On the other part of it is also looking at, on a step-by-step basis, whenever there are changes to the situation of COVID or even the SOP, that a continuous dialogue with the industry continues. And that's important because it's looking at how industry can best operate, how industries are comfortable to ensure that they can remain safe under the operating environment. Looking at the COVID situation, that's where we have seen that people in the manufacturing sector, they need to be physically at location. And when people in the services sector, this is where they have been a lot more flexible in looking at how they can operate in certain percentage from the office and the other percentage from home. And this is where I wanted to share some stories. Some of the global centers here in Malaysia have reported that they have been receiving extra tasks or assignments from centers back in America and Europe. And that's where, looking at the different degrees of where they were operating in America and Europe in the mid time of last year, and Kuala Lumpur continues to operate, and they had to take up these activities from that perspective. And they were pleasantly surprised that these activities continue to be supported, operated from a new location in Kuala Lumpur and Malaysia. So that's certainly an interesting sign of how things can be operated remotely, and we definitely want things to be back to normal whenever that's possible.
And how have you found, following on from that, for you as an agency during these times, how has requests and requirements from people coming in changed during that time? How have you adapted and worked with the government to try and align in response to that, to try and maximize KL and Malaysia for the new opportunities?
Sure. For InvestKL, we were looking at 3 specific strategies, which are protect, retain, and attract. Protect means we need to protect our current investments, wanting to ensure that they can operate, and same goes, the small, medium enterprises encircling those companies were able to operate as well, with the right licenses, with the right approvals, and so on. That would then wanting to ensure how can we retain not just the investments, but retaining the jobs. Protect and retain would certainly be an area where we feel that it will be a good case study to attract newer investments. Over the 2020 period, there were investments that have gone ahead with their plans, regardless of the COVID situation. There have also been investments that have been put on hold, simply because people say that COVID is a big reset. And that's true for governments and companies as well, looking at how they want to turn around their business plans, repurpose some activities, as well as planning those activities as a way forward. So those inquiries are encouraging, keeps coming in, not just for Kuala Lumpur, but Malaysia. And the industries have been interesting as well to move up the activities up the value chain.
Wonderful, thank you. This is to George. We've also got a question that's come in about the bilateral committees that you've mentioned between UK and MITI. And the question is, has other similar bilateral committees been set up with other ASEAN countries? And if so, how would someone from Malaysia be able to get involved with that? And who would they approach to advise about those market entries?
Thanks, Andrew. So in the way that these things always are in diplomacy, they always have a slightly different phraseology or terminology. They're called a different thing in different countries. But yes, in broad terms, we have ministerial, set-piece ministerial economic and trade dialogues with a number of ASEAN countries, and are adding more, or certainly intend to add more this year. So yes, already with Singapore, Vietnam, and the Philippines, and are close to agreeing new committees with Indonesia and Thailand. So there is that architecture out there. They're always called slightly different things and have slightly different structures, but broadly similar. If we can be helpful at all, then please just feel free to get in contact with us directly. Andrew, you'll have my details, and we can make those introductions to advise the company question.
Okay, and then another question for George is, thanks for the update on UK FTAs with various countries in the region. In regards to this, is there an update on UK's FTA with Malaysia, and how Malaysia could benefit from UK's accession to the CPTPP? I've got to make sure I get that one right. Considering hopefully Malaysia will speed up its accession to CPTPP. Thank you very much. And that's from Kogila from University of Warwick.
Thank you for that question, Zara Kagila. And Andrew, the trick is just to say it really, really quickly, and then you get used to it. But yeah, so for a free trade agreement between the UK and Malaysia, look, we are now an independent trading nation and want to be really, really ambitious, and I hope my remarks conveyed that. But we're in live negotiations with the US, Australia, and New Zealand, and we've all indicated our desire to accede to CPTPP. So there's a lot on our plate, and there's only so much we can take on. So there are currently, there aren't plans with Malaysia, and we'd have to see where they would end up in a kind of future program of free trade agreements. But obviously that discussion is continuous and live within the UK government. But there is a bandwidth issue there. And as I said, we don't quite know what Malaysia's position on CPTPP accession will be, but they are an existing member, and if the UK join, then obviously together we would benefits of that, and that would be a significant leap forward in UK Malaysia trade access and market access.
Yep, thank you very much. Question for Paul. As you've mentioned about your business and how much business you've got here with the retail, and I'm obviously taking into the current climate into context, because obviously with retail having challenges at the moment, people aren't able out to shop. If we were to take that, let's say, to one side, what do you feel in your experience in being in Malaysia could be enhanced, and how you could also, as Sports Direct, contribute to helping Malaysia move forward and support Malaysia's plans?
Yeah, a few things, I suppose. We still feel that Malaysia is the right place to grow the region from. I think nurturing of available talent, and there's plenty of talent here. We've decided to build our servers and our server rooms, and our IT infrastructure now supports China, Hong Kong, and our Taiwan supply chain offices from Malaysia. Interestingly enough, we have close to 40 staff that actually don't work for me. They work for our global services department, but based here, and they follow the same KPI as anybody working out of the UK, but with about a 40% cost benefit from being based in Malaysia. And additionally, within the retail industry, we don't work very well from home. It's all about interdepartmental communication and making things happen. So we've just opened a new headquarters here that can accommodate up to about 200 staff. And again, that's probably set up, I estimate, for about a fifth of what it would have cost us to do the same in the UK. So, every company is different. I think for us, the benefit is that we can grow, we can utilize a lot of local services with contractors and suppliers and even local manufacturers to support our business that will ultimately help us to support regional growth.
Wonderful, thank you. And also, your collaboration, has there been much collaboration between you and the public sector? And has that helped your business and potentially moved things or changed anything at all?
Not huge for us. I think there are a few things. We want to be a sustainability or enriched company, and actually we're working very closely with Sunway University on various initiatives, reuse, recycle, reduce, etc., which the Malaysian government and have been looking to get more heavily involved in, and I think that's good. And I think the logistics infrastructure in Malaysia is set to really expand, and we see using our current DC with a bonded facility as being the right strategic base to actually support the region. So that's probably about it on our side.
And also with you, Natasha, I understand obviously with BAE, there's only so much you can mention potentially that might be sensitive. But I wanted to get your views on how BAE's worked in line with a Malaysian plan? I mean, obviously one of them is that you've got very high skills, obviously software developers, and Malaysia's future is very much tied to technology and that future. And equally how you've found it working with the public sector as well.
I guess I'll take that in probably two snippets, Andrew. So from the Global Engineering Centre side, as you say, high-tech roles, that's something that we absolutely can and want to grow here. The type of work that they do is not necessarily just for Malaysia, so a good hub for us to do a lot of global work. The defence side, I guess, is where it gets a little bit more complicated. So completely opposite to what Paul's talking about on the retail side. Our dealings are purely with government. The forces, the land, air and sea forces are the ones who use our equipment. So for us to set up an industrial base here in Malaysia, for example, if we were to co-develop an aircraft, I'm taking it obviously, to an extreme, or, setting up a manufacturing site here for something that we potentially are looking at supplying across ASEAN. Going to be frank, but Malaysia will have to then, start developing some of those programs. Malaysia did write a defence white paper, probably just over 18 months ago. Some of those things are on track, but some not. And hence my point earlier about we really trying to work very closely with the forces and the government to help them. Defence and security is extremely important for Malaysia as a nation, and some of the equipment does need to be changed or upgraded. They all know that. But I think there's other areas that we as a company can look at as well. Pilot training is a big thing at the moment across the region. Is there a way that we could do something bigger with ASEAN or even wider in Asia that doesn't necessarily, is just for Malaysia, and therefore they can work together. We've got the FPDA, Five Power Defence Agreement. Those nations can work closer together. So it's ongoing conversations with the government, but as I say, it's very different to retail, so a little bit more complex, unfortunately.
I mean, coming to your mention about plans, proposals. I mean, having been here for a long time, Malaysia has normally multiple 5-year plans, and from education blueprints, and in my time being here, there's been quite a number, and obviously kind of as governments change, sometimes the focus changes as well. So from me looking at where the government is, I think the consistency of trying to have those core values from education, from where the technology is going. I mean, the Prime Minister came out with the new plan for digital, and where it's great to have these plans. The plans need to be in some ways potentially a bit more aggressive, a bit more driven. We know ASEAN's very competitive regionally, and I think Malaysia's really got to potentially take that next step up, but make sure that if there is any changes or anything that happens in government, these focuses stay, because I think any changes in 5-year plans or what it might be for road links or defense links, what it might be, it changes where the country goes. And I think the stability of having an education at the base and moving forward and keeping that, I think is obviously a priority that obviously our feedback's always to government to try and assist with. A quick question for Azmi that's come in. I'll reword it slightly. The FDI in Malaysia, obviously, I mean, I think everyone is down. I think obviously people are looking at regionally what's going on. Do you see that, or what's your forecast for FDI going forward in 2021? I don't know if you've got the statistics or can comment, so I'll be very honest on that one. But what's your feeling of where we're going and what we're doing?
Thanks, Andrew. Picking up on what you were saying earlier, fully agreed. Execution, success of a plan is in the execution, and we need to execute right. Picking up to what George was saying earlier as well, we have the 12 Malaysia plan that should be covering the year 2021 to 2025. And in the plan, InvestKL has for the first time been included in what we call as a Greater Kuala Lumpur Life Lab plan. That is to position Greater KL as a location for research and development as well as innovation, not just for the companies, but to also closely collaborate with the universities, be it public or private, as well as working with small, medium enterprises. Again, it's about linkages, and that's important. Notably, FDIs have dropped over the last year, a significant drop globally, as things have softened, demand have softened, and so on. Looking at the pipeline for the future, we continue to get a number of interesting projects across the world, from Americas, from Europe, as well as from Asia. And these are areas where they are driven by technology, a lot of digital initiative in there, a number of activities in the financial services are related as well, because as we are all sitting home, we are continuing to spend, and we see huge growth of online spending, and that's where we continue to see these activities. In the larger scheme of Malaysia, we continue to be very strong in the electrical and electronic sector, in the medical devices sector, where that has also been driving a number of initiatives as a way forward. However, I'm not in a position to share any forecasts on the FDI, but taking stock of the forecast of the GDP, it would certainly be encouraging. Perhaps not in the pre-2019 FDI levels, but a steady growth from Q3 onwards as the vaccine program as released as well.
I think George was talking about a 5% this year, I believe. I'm not sure what the figure George mentioned, but yes, which is solid growth, and helping us coming out. We've had vaccines arriving at the weekend, and as we've seen, even in Britain, with the volume of vaccinations rolling out, it starts changing the dynamic, and it's been very successful there. So fingers crossed that'll also help drive Malaysia as well. To Paul, you're probably the most likely person that on the panel that works with SMEs. How have you and how do you engage with SMEs, to help your business? I know you'll have supply chains, but obviously you'll engage locally as well. SMEs are important to that. So at what extent do you involve yourself with SMEs, and how do you help them, per se?
We work with a number of local companies, and we try and engage with local companies. We see Malaysia as something of a test center. We can experiment locally with lots of different things for retail. And obviously the retail environment is changing dramatically in the short term. Generational change for retail spending habits has been accelerating unprecedentedly over the last 12 months. But I go back to the cost efficiency of most of the things that we do, and we use Malaysia as a test center. So whether it's for the manufacture of fixtures and fittings, which we use quite extensively in retail, we are looking to expand our business into Singapore, but almost exclusively with the footprint designed, manufactured, and then exported into Singapore, which may not work for Indonesia and may not work for the Philippines. But I think that it becomes a copy-paste, and we have found that because of the cost benefits that I mentioned earlier, makes it the right environment for us to do things, even if we do them wrong, because it's a relatively low cost of making mistakes.
And as you sort of mentioned, I mean, Malaysia is a great place to be, even if, you know, particularly if Singapore is, you know, the business as well, because of the cost advantages and the accessibility into Singapore as well. So to all the panelists, I'd like to ask, before some final questions, what would be your advice to companies who are currently thinking about setting up business in Malaysia? If I could start with you, Natasha.
So again, looking at how we've grown, I've mentioned several benefits, talent pool, you know, various things earlier in the call. For me, it's a great place to set up a business and invest in. I would say that a bit of patience is probably required. There can be a little bit of a slow bureaucratic answers, but again, you know, is that just Malaysia, or is that probably many other places? So for me, a good place to invest in, but a company would need to have a bit of patience.
Back to you, Paul.
Yeah, so again, I mentioned earlier, Malaysia wouldn't be for everybody. I think do your research, as Natasha said. It is very important to visit. And I think that you will always have pros and cons of any particular country, and Malaysia will not suit everybody, that's for sure. I would try to think in the long term, as George mentioned, think beyond the political instabilities. I mean, I think that the current political and economic woes are affected by most countries around the world, and you need to look beyond those, because for any company setting up, it should be a mid to long term exercise anyway.
Wonderful. And question for Azmi relating to ease of setting up businesses. I mean, obviously, I mean, InvestKL is at the front of engaging businesses. My assumption would be that you help support those businesses and guide them to the relevant authorities, relevant agencies that would also play in that. Can you please open up a little bit about that as well? Sure.
InvestKL as an investment promotion agency remains apolitical. We serve the government of the day, and we are focused on the investments that we want to bring in. From that perspective, largely many of our investments are non-fiscal in nature. There are fiscal type of support where it requires the traditional tax incentives and so on, but majority are non-fiscal, focused on ease of doing business. And the ease of doing business activities are what, Andrew, you mentioned some of it, to facilitate and ensure that the right processes are being guided upon, to work closely with DIT, BMCC, and pointing to the right direction, where investor needs a bit more information, where to be guided, and things like that. And this facilitation would cover not just with pre-investments, but most importantly, the post-investment activities. And that includes if there are any regulatory changes or business environment regulations that have changed, we would be there as well to guide, as well as point the companies in the right direction, as we work closely with other international partners that the companies are familiar with, probably the international recruitment firms, the international banks, and that includes also the international property consultants. And this is putting together the whole ecosystem of support to facilitate and ensure that businesses can continue to grow and sustain from Greater Kuala Lumpur in the region. Wonderful, thank you. And last couple of questions. One's to George. You've mentioned the CPTPP. I'm getting faster and better at saying it. Where do you see the differences? You know, will it make a huge difference to Malaysia, to Britain, and how do you see that engagement happening?
Yeah, so So on CPTPP, as I said, I think it's about 13% of GDP, global GDP now, in terms of the current membership. And obviously, if you add the UK, you get up to somewhere nearer 20%. With some of the members of CPTPP, so Japan, the UK already has an existing and quite deep free trade agreement. So really our joint membership of CPTPP doesn't add too much, likewise with Australia and New Zealand. But with a country like Malaysia, obviously we don't have a separate trade policy agreement or free trade agreement. We're largely operating off WTO terms. So actually of the members, it's one of the relationships where the biggest progress will be made bilaterally for the UK by being dual members of CPTPP.
And this wouldn't need then.
And in terms of what we. Well, so it is a blanket multi-country or plurilateral would be the term we use, free trade agreement. Yeah, we would be shared members of a joint trading area with significant tariff reductions, market access. We'd make separate market access offers to each other as well, which is done bilaterally rather than across the whole membership. So it really would be a potentially big step forward in terms of UK-Malaysia trade opportunities.
And at the moment, you mentioned...
And I just, if I can do my sales pitch on CPTPP, sorry to interrupt you, but it really is a seismic 21st century trade agreement. I mentioned RCEP. Sorry to introduce more acronyms, which is obviously an even bigger deal, which binds in China, which is a huge development, that China is in a rules-based, internationally focused FTA, and it also has Japan and Korea in the same deal. So we shouldn't underestimate how difficult that was. RCEP's a really big deal, but it's a wider, shallower deal compared to CPTPP, which is really quite deep and sets 21st century standards on digital. Most free trade agreements are really, really out of date when it comes to digital chapters. But on digital and environmental standards, it's a really 21st century deal, and that's why the UK is excited by it. And the economic coverage of 13% of GDP for the world is really significant already.
But in a Malaysia context, you've got to wait for it to be ratified here first before that will become part of the equation as well.
Yeah, so Malaysia is a member, but a non-ratified member for now. So the question is really, for the Malaysian government, and they'll come to their own decision that makes sense for Malaysia, whether they want to ratify in the coming period.
So, putting you on the spot, I don't know if you can answer. So, in the meantime, what is the engagement per se with Malaysia? Obviously, you're trying to work with everyone to do as much bilateral trade as possible. But the next steps, obviously, I think from what you're discussing is, you're obviously pushing down that trade agreement as opposed to try and do smaller things that could consume a lot of time. And as you said, you don't have the bandwidth. So from my understanding, the eggs are all more in that basket than anything else.
I understand what you mean, but I mean the bandwidth point is real. Countries can't be negotiating dozens of FTAs at any one time. But I think there's also a common misconception in trade policy that an FTA is this kind of all-encompassing thing that will just resolve absolutely everything between two countries, in one go. I mentioned the UK-Japan deal last year. There is still more we'd like to do with Japan. An FTA is just a political and technical moment, often several years in the making, that allows you to make big progress across a number of areas. And obviously with Malaysia's CPTPP is a kind of pre-agreed or ready-to-go deal offers that. But the joint committee that I mentioned with MITI on wider market access issues and some of those around on education, qualification, accreditation, and insurance sector, etc. There is always things you can be doing bilaterally out with the set piece free trade agreement negotiations. So trade policy is really quite a varied toolbox, and the UK is trying to make sure that we use all the tools we have available.
Wonderful. As we're getting to our time, I'd love to be able to say thank you so much to all the panelists. Thank you very much for your input and your open input as well. I mean, I think it's very important to understand challenges as well as the great things that are going on. ASEAN, as we've discussed, I mean, has an incredible future. And, you know, for me personally, with the Chamber, you know, Malaysia is an incredible place to be. From, as we've discussed, you know, the quality of life here to doing business. And, you know, we've got agencies from Azmi and InvestKL who really are driving to help companies come into Malaysia. It is competitive, but having agencies like that, I think, are fundamental to Malaysia's growth. And it's great to see the success that I think InvestKL's had. And hopefully, as you've mentioned, you know, the green shoots, even in the current environment with COVID, have been challenging. But, you know, slightly biased, it is a great place to be, the cost benefits. So, you know, looking forward to the future. And 5-10 years, I see Malaysia just getting in a better and better place. So thank you everyone for also listening in. I hope it's been valuable to you. If there are any questions that you still have, please do reach out to Jennifer and the team at the Chamber. If there's something that you want to engage with InvestKL, all their information is there as well. You can easily Google and contact them too. You know, thank you so much, George, for your time. You know, I know you guys are there to support for trade, bilateral trade there. Paul, thank you for your insights and, you know, the challenges that Sports Direct's currently having. And thank you very much, Natasha, for giving us an overview of where BAE is and what it's like to be here in Malaysia as an ASEAN HQ. So I think with that, I'll pass back to Jennifer and go from there.
Yes. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for moderating and chairing the session. There's one question that I would like to just to share on behalf of the Chamber itself on Chamber's role in engaging with the Ministry, in particular Ministry of Finance. Just to share, we have had actually 2 engagements with the Minister of Finance, and positively because of our relationships with with InvestKL and the other government investment agencies, that some of these issues have been taken note, and we have got some favorable updates and favorable outcomes. You know, it is a long journey in addressing some of these issues, but in our engagements as part of the Chamber's advocacy work, we have, our issues are being listened to and actions have been taken, but it is a lot of patience, as Natasha said. So thank you with that. That brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you once again to all our speakers, for your valuable time despite your busy schedules. George, Azmi, Paul, and Natasha, for an insightful session, sharing your views on the challenges and also the positive points of being in Malaysia. And of course, thank you to Andrew, our Deputy Chairman, for being an amazing chair and moderating the session. Thank you again, I must say, to the InvestKL team for this collaboration, and David and his team at ReachAm Singapore. Thank you everyone for joining. I really hope you have found the sessions insightful. As Andrew mentioned, do reach out to us directly. I think the contact details are here. Most of you will know me. Do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or any support. We are looking forward to you joining us again. So please keep connected with us via our digital platforms, social media platforms for updates from the BMCC. Thank you again. Take care, stay safe, and have a good week ahead. Bye for now.